Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. Gavin Shaw, Alex Wolf, where we say goodbye. Man, it hurts to Obi Toppin on his way to Indiana. Did he get a fair chance in New York? Will he shine with the Pacers? And a little bit on how the Knicks are replacing him right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, and today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. I want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, because we are now available on all platforms. That includes on YouTube. So if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, hit that notifications bell so you never, ever miss a sode, and be sure to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. But who's shilling for subs? I'm Gavin Shaw, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. He is Alex Wolf, editor-in-chief of the Strickland. Alex, I don't know if you've noticed, but I've dimmed the lights in the upstate house that I'm currently staying at. I wanted to set kind of a somber mood because this is, and we're gonna have a second episode talking about the Dante DiVincenzo signing, and that'll be more exciting. Maybe I'll turn the lights up in here. Maybe I'll open the blinds. But for now, it's a very somber episode because one of the shining lights in my life over the last 3 years, Obi Toppin, is no longer in my life, at least in the same way. Sent off to Indiana for 2 second-round picks. This felt very much inevitable after another season where Julius Randle essentially played every available important minute, and yet it still hurts.
Yeah, so I guess first we should get into the return. It does hurt though. It's a shame because I think we both had really high expectations for what Obi could be based off of the flashes that he showed, especially when he was given chances to play. Also, obviously, from a value perspective, this is not great for the Knicks. This is probably one of the first real blemishes on the Leon Rose regime is how little they managed to get back for a guy that they spent a top 10 pick on in 2020, while many of his contemporaries right now are signing lucrative contract extensions. It's not a fantastic look for the Knicks. As far as what they got back, they got 2 second-round picks from the Pacers. They also got a traded player exception, which I think is worth around like $7 million. But
6.8. Yep.
Yeah, the second-round picks. So the Indy has traded away their own 2024, 2026, and 2027. They are in possession of Milwaukee's 2024 and Utah's 2027 second-round pick in full. They have a sort of oddly protected 2025 second from Miami. And then that, of course, means that they have their own 2025 second. And I think you can trade out to 2029 now. So they have their own 2028 and 2029 seconds intact as well. So take from that what you will. The Knicks got 2 of those in some way, shape, or form. If I had to guess, it would probably be the Milwaukee and Utah ones that are unprotected for next year and for 2027. To give the Knicks more draft capital next year to potentially include in a deal this year, as well as another one that's a little further out that they can use for other deals down the line. We have seen the Knicks love their second-round picks and are good at using them to grease certain deals, and also are great at just extracting second-round picks, which I guess is sort of what makes this a little frustrating, especially is that we've seen the Knicks literally like turn. I was just reminiscing on this a minute ago. We've seen the Knicks turn trading Ed Davis from one place to another and being the middleman for that into like 3 second-round picks in the past. And yet all they could get for their former top 10 pick, Obi Toppin, was a pair of them. I don't know, Gavin, my first thought, if we're going to get right into, did he get a fair shake in New York here? My immediate answer is no, he did not. And I also think that this is one of the huge downsides to having Tibbs as your head coach, is that the guy will never experiment with anything. And if he determines that someone is not like his guy early on, no matter how young they are, no matter how much potential they show, he's going to tank that person's value. because he's just straight up not going to play them. And like we saw some really tantalizing stuff from Obi, and we saw some really tantalizing stuff when he played with Julius Randle once or twice. And if he had been allowed to do that more, one, maybe we wouldn't be in this situation where the Knicks had to treat this as an inevitability that they had to get rid of Toppin because they were just not using him. But two, maybe had they then decided to trade him at some point, his value would have been higher than a couple second round picks. I mean, we'll get into more about what we're upset about as far as not getting to see from a on the court perspective with him on the Knicks and what we expect to see in Indy. But my initial reaction when the trade went down was like, this was inevitable, and yet also this is hugely disappointing because they really did this kid a disservice by not giving him any chances to play. I think I saw a stat out there. Actually, no, I'll let you talk and then I'll pull up the stat. But he was one of the top 10 picks that has been played least of all top 10 picks in the last like 20 years. Yeah. And the rest of the guys were all like resounding busts. And that's really unfortunate when you consider that Obi did not look like a bust. He looked like a very talented player that just never got to see the court for some reason.
Yeah. And look, here's what is truly insane about Obi Toppin's career. He was drafted 8th because he was the National Player of the Year as a center. And then he was asked to function as a wing in the NBA, right? I know nominally he played power forward off the bench and he never got to play the 3 in really any situation. But in terms of his role, he was never really used as a primary pick and roll guy. He was used as a rim runner off the ball, and he was just asked to stand in the corner and shoot a bunch of threes. And to his credit, he got pretty decent at it. After shooting 30% from 3 his first 2 years in the league, he got all the way up to 36% this year. And I think the takeaway I will always have on the guy is the infectious fun that he brought to the court, right? Like there are very few players in the history of Knicks basketball, at least my history with Knicks basketball, that have made me smile on a permanent basis like Obi Toppin. There are also real flaws in his game, right? He struggled as a defender. He never really improved off the dribble. And he would occasionally make really boneheaded decisions that I think Tibbs, to your point, more than other coaches, were particularly inclined to punish. And to some extent, those things are inevitable with a younger player. To another argument, you could say, all right, by his 3rd year, like those things had to get better. And they did to some extent. And he got more confident to some extent. But those bad decisions were still there. And where you forgive Tibbs a bit is no one saw when the Knicks drafted him, Julius Randle emerging as a guy who was going to make 2 second-team All-NBAs in 3 seasons, right? That was absolutely off the bingo card. And then that happened. And then, yeah, he should have played some minutes with both of them. I personally think those lineups could have had some success. I think they could have been a fantastic curveball in a series like the Heat one, where you were just looking for answers. But Tibbs's overall philosophy worked pretty well of having a rim protecting center. So I think he was done a disservice in some ways. I also see the argument for the world where this was just kind of the unfortunate outcome of Julius Randle making a relatively unprecedented leap in modern NBA history.
Yeah, it's I pulled that stat and I'll save that for just a second from now, and I'll show all the players that Obi Toppin has played the same amount of time as, which will be a little sad in and of itself. And then we can get into more about what worked, what didn't work in Obi's time, and then pay our final tribute to Obi's time with the Knicks. But first, I got to remind everybody that today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks, and I've been telling you guys about PrizePicks for a while. It's my new favorite daily fantasy game, and that's because it's not daily fantasy like what you think of daily fantasy being 10 years ago. It used to always be those contests that would be like, oh, spend like $20 and then build this like roster using all this money and blah, blah, blah. But then you would realize after a while, like you would look at the leaderboard at the end and you'd be like, why is it the same name up there like 40 times? Because someone would just buy a bunch of entries and then have these various lineups that their like algorithms told them would be the best for that dollar amount and blah, blah, blah. And they would just win all the money and you'd be stuck basically flushing $20 down the toilet. That's not the case with PrizePicks. PrizePicks is just you versus projections available. PrizePicks will pick projections for pretty much every player of every sport you can imagine. They cover like 30 different sports on the app. And then you just say, hey, I think this player will get more or less than what PrizePicks says. And you build an entry of up to 6 things on it. You pick 2 to 6 players, and then you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against other people. It's just you versus projections. And you can make entries in 60 seconds or less and do multi-sport entries. So if there's multiple, teams that you're interested in one given night in different sports, you can make an entry where it's all different players on different sports teams. They also offer safe and fast withdrawals, and it's currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. So if you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. All right, Gavin, we're back in talking Obi Toppin's unfortunately done stint with the Knicks. I wanted to share, I did look up that stat that I had seen on Twitter yesterday. Comes from Tag at IQ for 3 on Twitter. Lottery picks in the last 15 years with fewer minutes per game than Obi Toppin through their first 3 years with minimum 100 games played. Jerome Robinson, Thon Maker, Anthony Bennett, Thomas Robinson, Jimmer Fredette, Xavier Henry, Hashim Thabit, and Earl Clark. The notes, at least he's getting a real shot now.
Painful to see my guy Jimmer Fredette on there, upstate New York legend. But shout out Don McCurr also. He may have been 30 when he was drafted. So.
Yeah. So pretty damning stuff. I mean, I don't know. I guess here's like where we could take things in a little bit of a different direction, I guess. I don't know. Is there any world where you see the Knicks being right for just moving off of Obi at this point? I feel like we're both kind of in the camp of like, they just kind of did him dirty and like they probably should have just tried to find him more playing time because he's clearly talented. But I don't know. Does the Julius Randle factor like justify this decision? Is this more or less just like, I guess it's kind of just at this point, they sort of had to do this just to do right by Obi at this point. If they want to not if they want to not look bad to agents and everything else, I feel like this is a move they kind of painted themselves into the corner with. I don't know. It's so funny because this is a whole podcast, but I feel like I only have the same things to say like over and over again because it all just comes down to like they should have given him more of a chance and this all could have been avoided. Yeah. And it's very frustrating to me.
Well, I think it helps in terms of agent circles that his agent is Leon Rose's son, so that could ease the pain at least in terms of.
I mean, but that's the other thing though. Like, is this all just doing? Is this now turning into like doing Leon's son a solid?
Well, right. All right. Well, let me push back on it because I think I disagree a little. I think this is the right move for Obi and the right move for the Knicks, right? Because nothing was going to change. You can argue they did him dirty to some extent, and I think they did in the sense that he is clearly an NBA player. I mean, just heck, like you could say this his second season too, but look at his last 5 games this year, and you almost wonder, and it really tells you how little leverage the Knicks had that they couldn't get one of the Pacers' late first round picks from them because Alex, in 2 of his last 3 games of the season, he combined for 66 points against, wait for it, the Indiana Pacers on a combined 24 of 41 shooting while going 10 for 22 from 3 and having 10 rebounds and 11 assists in those 2 games, right? To me, that sounds like someone who is worth a late first round pick. So where I'm having a frustration is exactly what you said earlier, where if he was used in a more optimal way, both when he was on the court, but also just getting some run as a small ball 5, I think there's no world where the Knicks don't get a first round pick for him. That being said, that was against everything Tom Thibodeau has brought to the New York Knicks. And when you have Tom Thibodeau as your coach, You're kind of what is it, in for a parcel, in for a pound? I don't know. I forgot the phrase. But you are all in with the Tom Thibodeau experience, right? He has a very specific way of doing things. On the whole, those have generated very, very positive results for the Knicks. You and I are largely of the opinion that, all right, but to get to like that last 10%, like he's not the coach to get you there. That's a discussion for another day. But I think it's worth bringing up because to me, that summarizes the Obi Toppin experience in a nutshell, right? There are always going to be casualties to having Tom Thibodeau as your coach. Heck, that is true for every coach, where they are going to go about things in a very specific way, and there are going to be some absolutely worthy players who simply do not fit into that ecosystem, who do not fit into that infrastructure. And unfortunately, Obi Toppin was that guy, and it is a massive, massive credit. I will say it till the cows come home to Obi Toppin, that he essentially had a coach that said, like, this isn't for me, and he still turned himself into a rotation NBA player. And someone in Indiana, I've said it before, like, if he gets a shot there, and like, who knows, because they're going to play Miles Turner at center. They just drafted Jarace Walker in the top 10 to be their power forward. So he might be walking into a very similar situation if Walker ends up being just a better overall player. But if he gets 25 minutes a game there, like, he's going to put up 17 points, 8 rebounds, 3 assists per night, and do so super efficiently. He is an awesome, awesome player, but there are real limits to his game. And I think, I'm curious your take on this. I think in Indiana, like, we might get some justification of what Tibbs did when they're still playing other guys ahead of him.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I would be willing to bet that he ends up winning the starting job there to start, at least.
Yeah, I agree.
Over Walker, and whether he holds on to it will be a whole other story. I mean, he's going to be playing his butt off this year because he's going to be playing for a new contract. And I think we've mentioned this on the show before, but I've been saying this in private too. Like, this will be probably whatever his second contract ends up being will probably be the biggest contract of his career, like, in all likelihood, because he came into the league very old. He was 23 years old when he came in. He's going to be like, or 22, I don't know, whatever.
25.
He's going to be like, he's going to be like 26 by the end of this year. And that's most players' prime. That's usually when they sign their biggest deal of their career, but it's usually their second or their third contract, rather. It's their, they get their rookie extension. And then when they're like 26, 27, that's usually when they're signing like that big deal.
Mm-hmm.
But for Obi, it's going to be his first contract other than his rookie deal. So, I mean, I don't know. It is, to your point, like, he did come in and it was essentially Tibbs was like, this isn't what I like to do, because he came into the NBA as like an extremely elite pick and roll finisher and pick and roll playmaker. And the Knicks essentially just said from day one, like, well, you're not going to do that. You're just going to be basically Steve Novak.
Yeah, and
just
Alex,
stand
what's
over.
crazy is, like, they leaned even more in that direction. Like, his third year, he shot more threes than ever, and he shot at the rim less than ever. Like, this season, his volume at the rim was, I think it was like 34th percentile in the, so he went from going from 58% of his shots coming at the basket his second year to 34% of his shots coming from the basket his third year. So, like, they like took him even further away from what he did great.
Yeah, and it's, I don't know, that's part of what makes this so frustrating too, is that we have seen Tibbs sort of, like, we have guys that just kind of fit into Tibbs's boxes, I guess, but he's also sort of adjusted things for certain players. Like, for example, Josh Hart comes in and, like, yes, he does a lot of things that Tibbs likes as far as the defense and the rebounding and stuff. And yet he also worked Josh Hart in and worked to his strengths and said, you know what, we'll run more transition now and do stuff like that and, like, really take advantage of what you bring to the table. And yet he was never willing to do that for Obi. Also, Obi just constantly had his confidence, like, just yanked up and down, like, just as they were being like, well, if you make one bad decision, you're going to get pulled here, regardless of how good you're playing. I mean, even this playoffs was sort of like you mentioned, those really great games against Indy. The first game against Miami, when Julius Randle was out, he was one of, like, the only two guys that were worth anything shooting the basketball against the Heat, and was one of the only reasons that the Knicks were in that horrible game one, was because he was able to hit 3-pointers, and yet then was basically a DNP after that for Julius Randle, who we learned after the season had his ankle hurt so bad that he needed to get, like, a surgical clean out of it. to get it fixed up. And, Julius was clearly playing not quite himself, not quite at 100%, yet Obi still couldn't get the minutes here. I don't know. It'll just be one of those forever what ifs as far as the Knicks are concerned, but I would not be surprised if he gets plenty of opportunities with the Pacers to work with Tyrese Halliburton, to run pick and roll, to have a better space floor with Miles Turner, which that's not a knock on Mitch, but it's just, or Hartenstein for that matter, but it's just kind of the reality. Like, he always played with guys that by design, by Tibbs, were meant to stay, in the paint, waiting for offensive rebounds, which always made it a little difficult for him to get free there. That won't be the case in Indy. Maybe this is a good opportunity to take our final break real quick and come back and then talk about what we expect to see from Obi and just our final goodbyes. So we'll take our final break real quick and then we'll come back. We'll talk about what we expect to see from Obi and Indy, and maybe a couple of favorite moments from his time on the Knicks before he's no longer a Knick anymore. So that's coming up next. All right, we're back in to finish up talking about Obi. Gavin, I sort of lightly touched on it at the end of last segment, but what are you expecting to see out of Obi and Indy with Halliburton and with Mathurin and Miles Turner and this team that they're building over there now?
Yeah, so I think I want to expand a little bit on what I was talking about earlier between him and Jarace Walker, and why I feel like there's a world where, and maybe this is the curse of Obi Toppin's career, where he, after initially getting upended by an older player, he gets upended by a younger player, and he just has a feeling of, I just can't win. And that's because I think they desperately need a dynamic defensive presence at that power forward spot. I mean, you look at who kind of the building blocks of their roster are. They have, one, it's Tyrese Halliburton, who is not a good defender. They have Ben Mathurin, who is like fine-ish on that end at points as a rookie. I don't know. Their Pacers fans can comment on that better than I can, but maybe we'll be decent there down the road. They do have Bruce Brown, who's good and has a 2-year contract. They have Miles Turner, who's good. So maybe there's room for Obi to slot in, but that would be my concern for this team that had real significant defensive problems a year ago, and has to cover up for guys like Halliburton, like Buddy Hield. Like, does Obi get a fair shake? If he does, I think he can have an absolutely incredible season, because I know Knicks fans, maybe us included sometimes, love to hate on Tyrese Halliburton. We all get pissy when people put him ahead of Jalen Brunson on their top point guard list, but the dude is the best passer in basketball, right there with James Harden. I would argue he's probably number one right now. I guess Nikola Jokic as well, obviously. For Obi to be able to play with a creator like that, like, apologies to Brunson, apologies to, no apologies to Elfrid Payton, but he has never played with someone who could pass the basketball like that. He's never played with 10% of the shooting he's going to have in Indiana, to your point. Halliburton, absolutely elite shooter. Miles Turner, one of the best shooters at the center position in the league. Buddy Hield, frankly, one of the best shooters to ever walk planet Earth. Like, the space Obi's going to have running pick and rolls up top with Halliburton, with Turner space to the wing, is going to be absurd. I could see him having a Mitch-like season where he just flat out, he just shoots like 68% from the field while still taking a decent amount of threes. I also think one of the biggest skills New York could never unlock with him is his passing. And because you have Turner spaced out to the wing and you can actually use him as a roller, that opens up a Draymond Green-like opportunity for him that, Alex, you and I have always talked about with him as a short roll passer. And because he makes such quick decisions, and because he's such a lob threat, and defenses are just going to converge on him in, I think, a way they don't expect with such a space floor, I think he could average like 4 assists per 36 minutes. He's going to have some monster games. I'd honestly be surprised if he doesn't have a game where he scores over 35 points next season. I think he's going to have great moments. And again, I don't think any of that makes it the wrong move for the Knicks.
Yeah, it all just comes down to, I don't know that it was the wrong move for the Knicks to move on from him, given their commitment to Julius Randle and everything, but I do think it was wrong that they never gave more of a shot to playing both of them at the same time, which, could have led to, you would have hurt on the rim protection aspect a bit, but you could have taken advantage of some of those same things you were just mentioning about, like, potentially having Randle spaced out and then giving Obi the full runway to the hoop and everything else. But that's all the past now. I hope that he does all that and more in Indy. I do think, I think that he's probably there's a real chance that he might average 18 to 20 points per game this year as a starter, and like maybe win most improved player, like something like that. He's definitely going to make his cases for all those awards and everything else. And I think the Indy got a hell of a deal to get a guy like that for only 2 second-round picks that has shown in whatever opportunities he's ever gotten as like a starter caliber player that he could potentially be a 20 plus point per game scorer. That's huge for them to get him. I guess maybe we can now to close this show off. And then of course, next episode we'll have our Dante DiVincenzo. So, it won't all be doom and gloom. There's the Dante DiVincenzo episode coming up next where we'll try to be a little more optimistic about the new guy coming to the Knicks. But Gavin, what are some of your favorite, like if you were going to just pull a few things, first things that come to mind, what were some of the favorite memories of Obi with the Knicks that you had?
Yeah, I think it was honestly, it was like the between the legs dunk that he had, which I think, if I'm remembering correctly, came against the Indiana Pacers.
It did.
Yeah, wow. It's kind of crazy that this took so long, right? Like it feels like he's been begging to go play there pretty much his whole career. I'm not going to cite a specific one, but every time he caught a Hail Mary pass from Emmanuel quickly, like I think to me, if I'm looking at the shame of this, like there's a world where instead of being the 8th pick in the draft, Obi was like the 40th pick in the draft. And none of us ever really questioned the limited role that he had, or maybe just, or to a lesser extent. And he didn't have that pressure of being a top 10 pick and having to produce like a top 10 pick and getting top 10 minutes. And we just had, you could say the same thing about Emmanuel quickly. And unfortunately, or fortunately for both of them, they're just too good for this. Like where those two guys were just the leaders of the Knicks bench unit for 7, 8, 9 years. And they went down as just like one of the iconic duos in Knicks basketball history. And unfortunately, like Quickly was way overqualified for that. And Obi was a bit overqualified for that. But those two, Alex, they made magic. And to your point on the Heat game, in some ways, I don't look at that as the best example just because he was left open and you saw one of the flaws with Obi, like, all right, he can shoot, but like, is it just because teams don't treat him as a shooter? But I go back to even like game 5 against the Cavs when we closed them out and he had, I think, 12 points and 5 rebounds in that game, shot 5 for 10 from the field, 2 for 5 from 3. Like he just had these moments in big games, like when things would click for him against the best teams, it felt like nothing else because I was rooting for him. I think maybe right there with Quick, but more than anyone on this team, I wanted to be proven right on Obi Toppin. I wanted Tibbs to be proven wrong on Obi Toppin. And when he'd have those moments against those teams where he'd get out in transition, have a big dunk, or like inexplicably like cross someone up off the dribble and finish with an up and under, or hit a big 3, like it felt like, yes, like this is what we've been waiting for. And it was that, and it was the passing and just his ability to play smart basketball combined with one of the freakiest athletes we've ever seen on the Knicks. That'll always stand out to me.
Yeah, I think it was the Obi leak outs were legendary. I don't think there's, so like for a little context, like my wife, despite my my huge fandom and time spent on the Knicks and everything else that I do, she has not really caught the bug. She's still generally, if I'm watching a Knicks game, she'll got to be doing something else, whatever. The one thing over the last like few years that has always gotten her interested in a game is like, oh, is there an Obi dunk in this game? Like they're the most electric moments that the team had to offer. And, I think that he provided this team still now, and it's only getting more so this way. They're just not an explosive team. There's not explosive athletes on the Knicks at this point, and getting DiVincenzo doesn't really change that. Losing Obi Toppin changes that in a big way. He was kind of the last guy that they had that really was bouncy and, could get up and get these highlight plays, could get these momentum shifting plays. And that is important to some degree in the NBA. Like it is, no matter whether it just means 2 points or not, like it's demoralizing to get dunked on. And it's a big crowd shifter, and the crowd plays a part. The NBA isn't exactly pro wrestling or anything, but like, the crowd plays a big part in how well the home team is playing, and how poorly the away team is playing. And Obi was always able to either get the Garden crowd going or shut the road crowd up with a big dunk, which is something that the Knicks are going to be missing now at this point. Other than maybe like Julius Randle, he did, to his credit, become a lot more bouncy this year. But yeah, it's a big loss. I remember, I specifically remember the through the legs dunk, like you said. I remember the stretch at the end of last year. That will be one of my more fond Obi memories, where we just got to see an actual unleashed version of IQ and Obi working together, and just how crazy deadly that could be if they were given the minutes. Now, granted, it was the end of the season, and the Knicks were facing a lot of teams that didn't have a ton to play for themselves, but I still think nonetheless it showed a glimpse of what could have been. Had the Randall breakout not happen and all that stuff. And then I guess lastly, I still, if there's a good one, I still enjoy a good dunk contest. I thought the Obi's one that he was in, contrary to what anyone might say, was a good dunk contest, and he was a well-deserving winner of that dunk contest too. So that was always fun. Always good to add to the lore of Knicks dunk contest guys. And all apologies to Jericho Sims still being on the team, but I don't think that they're going to have another dunk contest winner for a little while with that that lack of bouncy athleticism that they don't have on the team at the moment.
I don't know, man. Brunson's looking pretty ripped. You might surprise us next year.
Brunson or RJ or Randall. Yeah, one of them just comes out of nowhere. Josh Hart win a dunk contest. At any rate, Gavin, unless you have something else to add, I think we can unfortunately close the book on the Obi Toppin chapter here, until, of course, he comes to the Garden and rips the Knicks a new one. Yeah. And then we'll, I'm sure, have something to say about that at some point this season.
Yeah, all I can say is I'm rooting for the guy. Like, nothing but the best for him. Like, he was, like, especially for, like, I know he was an younger player, but still for a younger player, like, it took until this offseason for anything about Obi wanting out or Obi like arguing with Tibbs to leak out. That is a real testament to a guy who, like, proved over and over again he is talented enough to start in the NBA, didn't get the chance to, and all he did was, like, smile every day, bring positive energy on and off the court. And, like, honestly, like, Alex, like, it's easy to like when you watch 82 games a year or more, thank God, recently, like we both do, it's easy to, like, kind of get bored, to get, like, a little bit apathetic to it. Like, Obi was, like, and along with IQ, like, absolutely the best antidote to that, right? Like, he made it fun the whole year long, and that made our lives, like, better and our jobs easier. So shout out to you, Obi. Best wishes in Indiana.